The Douglas A-20 was one of the most popular and effective U.S. light bombers of World War II. It would also, strangely enough, be one of the Soviets' favorites. The A-20 was produced by the renowned Douglas Aircraft Company, which also created the SBD Dauntless dive bomber. The plane was reliable, considered easy to use, with solid armor and real firepower. Equipped initially with multiple 50-caliber machine guns, it could carry up to 2 tons of bombs. It honored Douglas's legacy of creating aircraft that could take a beating. This is why it became loved by airmen across the globe. More than 7,000 A-20s were produced during the war. It was operated by American, Australian, Brazilian, British, Canadian, Dutch, French, South African, and even Soviet crews. The A-20 saw combat on all fronts. From the Pacific's tropical jungles to Africa's deserts and the frozen Russian lands, it was never left behind from 1940 to 1945. 3,000 of them made it to the Soviet motherland. They would be heavily modified by Soviet engineers to make them more accurate, more effective, and more deadly. It would help change the tide of the war on the Eastern Front. Douglas Aircraft Company demonstrated it designed its aircraft to be not just innovative, but game-changing. The Douglas A-20, nicknamed the Havoc, proved just that. Design and development. The origins of the American Douglas A-20 can be traced back to 1936, when a design team under Donald Douglas, Jack Northrop, and Ed Heinemann produced a proposal for a light twin-engine bomber powered by a pair of 340-kilowatt Pratt & Whitney R985 Wasp Junior radial engines. The aircraft received the designation Model 7A. It would be equipped with 3 30-caliber machine guns in the nose, dorsal, and ventral positions, and had a crew of 3. Nonetheless, the model was ditched in December 1936 because intelligence gathered from aircraft performance of similar characteristics during the Spanish Civil War demonstrated that it would be rendered obsolete. In 1937, the U.S. Air Corps issued the specifications for a brand new twin-engine medium bomber aircraft. They were interested in a plane with an estimated range of 1,200 miles, a speed between 200 and 250 miles per hour, and a 1,200-pound bomb load. The team behind the Model 7A decided that their design was a good fit for the competition if they made some additional modifications. They decided to scale up their current model. The result was the Model 7B, which was considerably larger and bulkier. It had a longer wingspan, a tricycle landing gear, and engines that gave a speed of 325 miles per hour. The 7B also saw its arsenal expanded, with 4 fixed forward-firing 30-caliber machine guns and 3 flexible dorsal and ventral 30-caliber guns. Global acquisitions. The prototype, however, attracted the attention of a French purchasing commission that happened to be present during the competition. They discreetly traveled to the U.S., seeking new aircraft to modernize their armée de l'air in the wake of the Munich crisis and the threat of German aggression. The world knew that a new conflict approached on the horizon. From December 1938 to January 1939, French pilots tested the aircraft and were convinced about its effectiveness. France ordered 270 Douglas Model 7Bs. Nonetheless, before France surrendered in June 1940, only 70 of them had been delivered. The rest of the aircraft went to the British Royal Air Force. During this time, Heinemann made improvements on the model, increasing range, engine, firepower, and other modifications that again attracted the attention of the U.S. Air Corps. With Heinemann's evolving modifications, various models began meeting the Air Corps and British demands. It was to be called simply the Douglas Bomber 7, or DB-7. The DB-7B variant was given the name Boston 3 in British service, or A-20 in the U.S. In a report to the British Aeroplane and Armament Experimental Establishment, the A-20 was described as an aircraft that, quote, has no vices and is very easy to take off and land. The airplane represents a definite advantage in the design of flying controls, extremely pleasant to fly and maneuver. The aircraft began to be sold across the globe to all Allied nations. Pilots often considered it their favorite aircraft for the ability to toss it around like a fighter. It could take a beating and be extremely adaptable for various combat roles. It quickly began to be seen in every war theater. The Soviet A-20s. Hitler's Operation Barbarossa took the Russians by surprise in June 1941. The Wehrmacht nearly wiped out the Red Army Air Forces and the Soviet Naval Air Forces by the end of the year. The the Russians lost more than 9,173 aircraft, a number that could not be replaced in a short amount of time. Stalin, fearing the worst, such as a possible invasion of Moscow and the final defeat of the Soviet army, reached out to the US and Britain for aid under the Lend-Lease program. Stalin wished to receive the best technology the US had at its disposal, but the Americans were no fools. They were going to help the USSR, but by no means would they give out their top-tier technology for the Soviets to copy them. Instead of receiving B-17 or B-24 bombers, Stalin got the Douglas A-20s, and it was precisely what the Russians needed, if they could get there. German sea and land blockades proved a problem for shipping. The Kriegsmarine U-boats were a costly threat in the Atlantic and the Northern Sea for the efficient speed at which they sent tens of tons of supplies to the bottom of the ocean every month. The Allies had to find creative alternatives for sending the aircraft to Russia. Upon approval, the British immediately sent Russia 277 Bostons to the port of Murmansk, but additional routes were created during the first months of 1942. 869 Douglas A-20s were flown directly from the US to South America and then across Africa. Once there, in the middle of the Al Alamein campaign, they were cautiously flown to Abadan, Iran, and then to Mother Russia. Another 550 aircraft were later directly sent to Iran by ship, and from there to the Soviet Union. Once the Japanese were expelled from the Aleutian Islands in 1943, the U.S. Air Force also used the Alaskan-Siberian route to fly 1,369 A-20s to the USSR. U.S. aviators flew the planes to Alaska, where Russian pilots picked them up and took them all the way to the homeland. 5 specially organized Soviet ferry regiments were responsible for shepherding the aircraft home. Overall, more than 2,990 A-20s of all variants went to the USSR, making it the bomber's single largest wartime user. Soviet aircrews, just like the pilots of other nationalities, instantly liked the A-20's speed, agility, ruggedness, and performance. At the Zavod No. 81 facilities in the outskirts of Moscow, Soviet aviators and engineers completed a series of modifications on the aircraft they received from the Allies. The A-20 was good, but not perfect. First of all, Russian engineers altered some variants to carry 550-pound bombs, as the first versions could not do so. The A-20C and A-20G models were fitted to carry 2,200-pound air-dropped naval mines, or up to 2 Soviet 45-36 AN torpedoes for strike missions. Additionally, changes were made to the rear and front 50-caliber machine guns. They were replaced by local MV3 turrets and 20mm cannons. Another technical change Soviet engineers made was replacing the Wimper's D-8 bomb sight, which was very inaccurate, with a Russian-made NKPB-4 bomb sight. Further minor tweaks were made to better suit the Russian style of warfare. The Havoc and Russian victories. The A-20s were crucial for the victory at Stalingrad in 1943, when the German Sixth Army was encircled and isolated from receiving exterior support. Various A-20s were part of the air blockade that impeded the Luftwaffe from resupplying the German garrison at Stalingrad. At the Battle of Kursk, the biggest tank battle in military history, A-20s assaulted German barracks with bombs and, through recon operations, identified panzer tanks for the Russian artilleries to hit. The 7th Air Army's A-20s also supported the June 1944 Soviet Karelian offensive against the Finnish soldiers defending the Svir River. During Operation Bagration, an offensive in the summer of 1944 that sought to destroy the German Army Group Center, A-20s conducted bombing and reconnaissance missions that broke the Axis lines defending the Crimean frontier. All the way through the end of the war, the modified Douglas A-20s were part of every single Russian offensive. During the last days of the war, Russian A-20s of the 51st MTAP rendered the 14,000-ton pre-dreadnought German battleship Scheichen a constructive loss and sank the 15,000-ton cruiser Orion, as well as sinking U-boats. The Russian Havocs also fought the Japanese and Korean ports and the island of Hokkaido before the country surrendered in August 1945. The Douglas that broke Havoc. Although the Douglas A-20 did not achieve the recognition it deserved from Soviet historians of the Cold War era for political and patriotic purposes, it played a vital role in gaining the upper edge against the Germans. The A-20s represented 20% of Russia's air assets during World War II. If it was not for Allied help, Russia would have never known victory in the Eastern Front. Mother Russia had the manpower, but not the technology or the resources to produce technology capable of destroying the Wehrmacht on its own. The 3,000 Douglas A-20s the Soviets received were there to change the tide, one aircraft at a time.